There's nothing quite like watching someone dismiss your expertise because they can't see past your circumstances. Every single parent who's ever worked two jobs, every person who's ever been looked down on because of their circumstances, knows this feeling in their bones. Diego Vasquez had revolutionized engine diagnostics and held patents worth millions. But a bitter divorce and corporate betrayal left him working at Valley Motors in the small town of Pine Harbor, struggling to support his teenage daughter Zara while rebuilding a life that had been systematically destroyed by those he once trusted. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. When tech mogul Cassandra Whitmore's limited edition McLaren broke down during the most important business trip of her career, she stormed into the modest garage, expecting to find who could solve her problem quickly. Instead, she found Diego, coveralls stained with grease, hands that showed the evidence of honest work, carrying himself with the quiet dignity of a man who had lost everything but refused to be broken. Cassandra took one look and made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of the day. "You have exactly 10 minutes to fix my car, or you're fired," she declared, not knowing she was speaking to the man who had designed the very diagnostic system her car's computer relied on. What happened next would shatter everything Cassandra believed about competence, worth, and the dangerous assumptions we make about people based on their appearance. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cracked concrete of Valley Motors, where Diego Vasquez stood hunched over the engine bay of a vintage Mustang that had been giving its owner trouble for weeks. At 38, his dark hair showed early streaks of silver, not from age but from the stress of the past 3 years since his world had collapsed around him. The garage itself reflected the reality of small-town automotive repair, functional but far from glamorous. Tools hung on pegboard walls with the kind of organization that spoke of someone who couldn't afford to lose anything, while the concrete floor bore the permanent stains of countless oil changes and transmission repairs. But if you knew what to look for, you'd notice something unusual about Diego's workspace. Hidden among the standard wrenches and socket sets were precision diagnostic tools that belonged in a high-end research facility, digital oscilloscopes, advanced pressure sensors, and computer interfaces that cost more than most people's cars. These instruments whispered of a different life, one where Dr. Diego Vasquez had been the leading automotive diagnostics engineer for Whitmore Technologies, the same company that now dominated the luxury car market with innovations he had created. The Mustang's owner, Mrs. Thompson from the local bakery, waited patiently in a plastic chair by the garage door, having brought Diego a thermos of coffee and homemade pastries, the kind of small kindnesses that defined relationships in Pine Harbor. This town of 12,000 souls existed in the comfortable space between rural and suburban, where people still knew their neighbors and local businesses formed the backbone of the community. It was the kind of place where a single father running an auto repair shop was respected for his dedication to both his craft and his daughter. "Found your problem, Mrs. Thompson," Diego announced, straightening up with a slight grimace. Years of bending over engines had taken their toll, but it was honest work that let him sleep at night. "Your mass airflow sensor has been giving intermittent readings. It's causing your engine to run rich, which is why you've been getting poor gas mileage and that rough idle at stoplights." Mrs. Thompson nodded appreciatively, though the technical details sailed over her head. What mattered was the quiet confidence in Diego's voice, the certainty that came from true expertise rather than guesswork. "How much will that set me back, dear?" "The part runs about $60, and I can have it installed in an hour. Labor's another $40, but you can pay me when you pick it up if that works better." This was Diego's way, never making anyone feel embarrassed about money troubles in a town where they were as common as morning fog rolling in from the distant mountains. As Mrs. Thompson left with promises to return after lunch, Diego heard the familiar sound of the school bus rumbling down Harbor Street. He checked his watch, 3:20. Zara would be walking up the gravel drive any moment, backpack slung over one shoulder, moving with the determined stride of a 16-year-old who'd learned to be independent too early. Zara Vasquez was everything Diego had hoped for in a daughter, brilliant, compassionate, and fiercely protective of the family they'd built together after the divorce. She'd inherited her father's analytical mind and gift for understanding complex systems, though she expressed it through coding and app development rather than automotive engineering. At 16, she was already taking college-level computer science courses online while maintaining a 4.0 GPA at Pine Harbor High. "Dad, Zara called as she approached the garage, her voice carrying that particular tone that meant she had something important to discuss. Jessica's mom was asking if you're really qualified to work on her BMW. She said she didn't think a small-town mechanic could understand modern computer systems. Diego felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came whenever people assumed his capabilities based on his current circumstances rather than his actual qualifications. After 3 years in Pine Harbor, he'd thought this kind of casual dismissal would have faded, but apparently some attitudes died hard. "What did you tell her?" "I told her you have more automotive engineering patents than anyone else in the state, and that you literally wrote the diagnostic protocols that BMW uses in their service centers." Zara's voice carried an edge of defensive pride that made Diego's heart ache. His daughter shouldn't have to defend her father's competence to narrow-minded adults. "Zara, you don't need to fight my battles. People's assumptions about small-town mechanics don't change the quality of my work." Diego wiped his hands on a shop rag, choosing his words carefully. "But I appreciate you standing up for me." They walked together toward the small apartment above the garage, climbing the narrow staircase that led to their home. The space was modest but carefully arranged, with Zara's computer setup occupying one corner of the living room like a mission control center for her various coding projects. Her acceptance letters from 3 different universities sat framed on the wall, full rides to study computer science, the result of talent, hard work, and Diego's determination that his daughter would have every opportunity she deserved. The kitchen held evidence of their morning routine. 2 coffee cups in the sink. Zara had started drinking coffee at 15, claiming it helped her concentrate. A plate with toast crumbs, and a notepad where Diego kept track of grocery money and Zara's upcoming school events. Everything was carefully budgeted, from Zara's AP exam fees to the small emergency fund Diego was building in case the garage had a slow month. While Zara worked on her homework at the kitchen table, Diego prepared their dinner with the same methodical approach he brought to engine repair. Tonight it was grilled chicken, rice, and vegetables from the garden Zara had started behind the garage, a project that had evolved from a school biology assignment into a genuine passion for sustainable living. "Tell me about the Whitmore Technologies patents again," Zara said, without looking up from her calculus homework. This request came at least once a month, always phrased exactly the same way. Diego paused in his stirring, feeling the familiar mix of pride and pain that came with remembering his former life. "Which part?" "The diagnostic algorithms, or the sensor integration. The part where they made millions from your work while you ended up here." Diego sat down beside his daughter, watching her work through complex equations with the same precision she brought to everything else. The story never got easier to tell, but Zara deserved to understand why their lives had taken such a dramatic turn, and why her brilliant father was now changing oil filters instead of revolutionizing automotive technology. Outside, the first streetlights were flickering on in Pine Harbor, and the evening air carried the scent of wood smoke from someone's fireplace. Tomorrow would bring another day of honest work, satisfied customers, and the quiet satisfaction of solving problems with his hands and mind. Diego had built a good life here, even if it wasn't the life he'd originally planned. But he had no way of knowing that tomorrow would bring Cassandra Whitmore and a 10-minute ultimatum that would force him to choose between the safety of anonymity and the vindication he'd never dared to hope for. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next morning arrived with the crisp bite of autumn air that signaled another busy day at Valley Motors. Diego's alarm had gone off at 5:30 a.m., the same time it had every day for the past 3 years since he'd taken over the struggling garage from its previous owner. By 6:15, he was already in the shop, going through his morning ritual of checking the overnight diagnostics on 3 vehicles that had been giving their owners persistent trouble. His first customer wouldn't arrive until 7 o'clock, but Diego preferred these quiet morning hours when he could work without interruption. This was when he did his most complex diagnostic work, the kind that separated a true automotive engineer from someone who simply replaced parts until something worked. The computer bay in the corner of the garage hummed softly, running overnight analysis protocols that Diego had written himself, code that could identify intermittent electrical faults that stumped dealership technicians. Zara appeared in the doorway at 6:45, dressed for school but carrying a travel mug of coffee and a piece of toast. At 16, she'd inherited her father's tendency to rise early and think clearly in the morning hours. The Williams Prius finished its diagnostic cycle, she announced, checking the tablet that Diego used to track all ongoing projects. "Looks like you were right about the hybrid battery module. Cell 7 is showing voltage inconsistencies." Diego smiled at his daughter's casual use of technical terminology. Zara had grown up in this garage learning automotive systems the way other kids learn to ride bikes. By age 12, she could diagnose basic electrical problems by sound alone. Now, at 16, she understood complex vehicle systems better than most certified technicians, even though her real passion lay in software development rather than mechanical repair. "The replacement module should arrive this afternoon," Diego replied, pulling up the diagnostic report on his laptop. The screen displayed a wealth of technical data that would have looked like hieroglyphics to most people, but Diego read it like a favorite book. "I'll call Mrs. Williams and let her know we can have her car ready by tomorrow morning." What made Diego's diagnostic capabilities unusual wasn't just his technical knowledge. It was the sophisticated equipment he'd gradually acquired over the past 3 years. Hidden among the standard automotive tools were instruments that belonged in a research laboratory. Digital storage oscilloscopes capable of capturing microsecond electrical events, pressure transducers accurate to within a fraction of a psi, and spectrum analyzers that could identify mechanical problems by analyzing vibration frequencies. Most customers never noticed these high-end instruments, assuming they were just fancier versions of normal garage equipment. But the few automotive professionals who had visited Valley Motors always left with puzzled expressions, wondering how a small-town garage could afford diagnostic capabilities that rivaled those of major dealerships. The answer lay in Diego's previous life, when he'd been Dr. Diego Vasquez, senior diagnostic engineer for Whitmore Technologies. He'd developed most of these instruments himself, creating prototypes that later became industry standards. When his divorce from Miranda Blackstone, Whitmore Technologies' chief financial officer, had turned ugly, he'd managed to keep some of his personal equipment by claiming it was worthless experimental gear. Miranda had been more interested in the house, the investment accounts, and making sure Diego couldn't compete with Whitmore Technologies than she was in what looked like obsolete electronic devices. Diego's workbench told the story of his dual existence. Alongside standard automotive manuals sat advanced engineering texts on signal processing and control systems theory. His computer contained not just vehicle service databases, but also mathematical modeling software and programming environments that he used to develop custom diagnostic solutions for particularly challenging problems. The phone rang at 7:15, interrupting his review of the day's scheduled appointments. "Valley Motors, this is Diego." "Diego, thank God you're there early." The voice belonged to Dr. Martinez from the local medical clinic. "My wife's Mercedes is making that grinding noise again, and she has a job interview in Sacramento at noon. I know you said it might be the transmission, but I was hoping—" "Bring it in right now," Diego interrupted. "I can take a quick look before my first scheduled appointment. If it's what I think it is, I can have it roadworthy in an hour." This was Diego's reputation in Pine Harbor, the mechanic who could work miracles when people desperately needed them. He'd built this reputation through a combination of exceptional diagnostic skills and a willingness to prioritize emergency situations over his own convenience. In a small town where people depended on their vehicles for everything from getting to work to medical emergencies, Diego's expertise had become an essential community resource. Zara looked up from her tablet, where she'd been reviewing the day's schedule. "Dad, you're already booked solid until 6 tonight. When are you going to work on the Corvette project?" The Corvette project was Diego's personal passion, a 1967 Stingray that he'd bought as a rust bucket and was slowly restoring to perfection. But this wasn't just any restoration. Diego was rebuilding the car with modern diagnostic systems and performance enhancements that represented the cutting edge of automotive technology. The project served as both stress relief and a way to keep his engineering skills sharp, even though he could only work on it during stolen moments between paying customers. "I'll get to it," Diego replied, though they both knew that customer needs always came first. The Corvette could wait. Mrs. Martinez's job interview couldn't. By 8 a.m., Valley Motors was humming with activity. Diego had correctly diagnosed Dr. Martinez's Mercedes, a failing CV joint that created noise during turns, and had the repair well underway. 2 other customers waited in the small seating area, drinking coffee from the pot Diego kept fresh all day and reading magazines that Zara updated monthly from the library's donation pile. This was Diego's world. Honest work performed with exceptional skill, serving people who trusted his expertise and depended on his integrity. He'd traded the corporate salary and prestige of Whitmore Technologies for something more valuable, a business where his reputation was built on results rather than politics, where his dedication as a single father was respected alongside his technical abilities. But as he worked under the hood of the Mercedes, Diego couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully constructed new life was about to be disrupted. The letter from Whitmore Technologies' legal department had arrived 3 days ago, demanding that he stop using, quote, proprietary diagnostic protocols in his repair work. The letter was clearly a fishing expedition, an attempt to discover whether he was using knowledge from his former position to compete with their authorized service centers. Diego had thrown the letter away, but its implications worried him. If Whitmore Technologies was monitoring his work, it meant someone had noticed that Valley Motors was achieving diagnostic results that exceeded what should be possible with standard equipment. And if they were paying attention to his capabilities, it was only a matter of time before they tried to shut him down or force him to sign a non-compete agreement that would destroy the business he'd worked so hard to build. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same company that had stolen his innovations and destroyed his career was now threatening to eliminate the modest livelihood he'd built from the ashes of their betrayal. But Diego had learned hard lessons about fighting corporations with unlimited legal resources while trying to protect a family. He couldn't afford another legal battle, and Zara's future depended on the stability they'd finally achieved in Pine Harbor. What Diego didn't know was that Cassandra Whitmore herself would be walking through his garage door in just a few hours, carrying an ultimatum that would force him to choose between the safety of anonymity and the vindication he'd never dared to pursue. The woman who had inherited the empire built on his stolen work was about to discover that the quote-to-quote Little's invasion of Sami was the very genius whose innovations had made her family fortune possible. As Diego finished the Mercedes repair and prepared for another day of serving Pine Harbor's automotive needs, he had no idea that his quiet life of dignified exile was about to collide with the corporate power structure that had once destroyed everything he'd worked to achieve. Across the country in Manhattan, Cassandra Whitmore stood on the 42nd floor of Whitmore Technologies Tower, watching the morning sun paint the city's skyline in shades of gold and amber. The view was worth millions, which was appropriate since the building itself had cost nearly that much to acquire and renovate. At 35, Cassandra possessed the kind of polished perfection that came from unlimited resources and careful cultivation. Personal trainers, nutritionists, stylists, and a team of assistants who managed every aspect of her appearance and schedule. Her corner office sprawled across 1,500 square feet of prime Manhattan real estate, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered commanding views of Central Park and the Hudson River. The space was decorated in minimalist luxury, Italian marble floors, custom furniture designed by artists whose names appeared in museum catalogs, and a collection of abstract paintings that her art advisor had assured her would appreciate in value. Everything in the office served dual purposes, displaying wealth while projecting the image of a serious technology executive who deserved to be taken seriously in boardrooms dominated by men. The Whitmore Technologies empire had been built on a foundation of automotive diagnostic innovations that revolutionized how luxury vehicles communicated with service technicians. What had started as a small engineering consultancy 15 years ago had grown into a multinational corporation with licensing agreements spanning 3 continents. Cassandra had inherited control of the company when her father died 5 years earlier, though she'd been groomed for leadership since graduating from Wharton with an MBA in strategic management. This morning's schedule was typical of Cassandra's carefully orchestrated life: a board meeting at 9 to review quarterly earnings, a video conference with European partners at 11, lunch with potential investors at 12:30, and a flight to the West Coast at 3 for meetings with automotive manufacturers in Detroit and Silicon Valley. Her assistant, Marcus, managed these logistics with military precision, ensuring that Cassandra moved through her days without ever having to concern herself with mundane details like travel arrangements or meal planning. The irony of Cassandra's position was that while she commanded a technology empire, her understanding of the actual engineering that powered Whitmore Technologies remained largely theoretical. She could read financial reports and quarterly projections with ease, could negotiate licensing deals worth millions of dollars, and could present quarterly results to shareholders with confidence and authority. But if pressed to explain how the diagnostic algorithms actually functioned, or why their sensor integration protocols had become industry standards, Cassandra would have struggled to provide anything beyond marketing-level explanations. This disconnect between corporate leadership and technical understanding had never bothered Cassandra because it seemed unnecessary for someone in her position. She employed dozens of engineers whose job was to understand the technical details, while her role focused on strategic vision and business development. The diagnostic technologies that formed Whitmore's foundation were mature products now, generating steady licensing revenue that required little active development or innovation. Her morning began with a review of overnight emails from international partners, followed by a briefing from her head of business development about potential expansion opportunities in Asian markets. The numbers were impressive. Whitmore Technologies had achieved another record quarter, with licensing revenue up 18% over the previous year. Their diagnostic protocols were now standard equipment in luxury vehicles from 12 different manufacturers, generating royalty payments that provided a steady stream of income regardless of economic fluctuations. Cassandra's phone buzzed with a text from her personal assistant confirming that her car was ready for the drive to the airport. The McLaren 720S was her preferred vehicle for important business trips, a machine that cost more than most people's houses but provided the kind of performance and prestige that reinforced her status as a serious technology executive. The car's diagnostic systems, ironically, relied heavily on Whitmore Technologies' innovations, though Cassandra had never made that connection explicitly. As she prepared to leave for the airport, Cassandra reflected on the upcoming meetings with automotive executives in California. Whitmore Technologies was negotiating several major licensing deals that would expand their diagnostic protocols into electric vehicle platforms, a market segment that represented the future of automotive technology. The meetings were crucial for maintaining Whitmore's position as industry leaders in vehicle diagnostics, and Cassandra had spent weeks preparing presentations that emphasized their technological advantages and market dominance. The elevator ride to the parking garage gave Cassandra a moment to review her talking points one final time. She would emphasize Whitmore Technologies' 15-year track record of innovation, their comprehensive patent portfolio, and their proven ability to integrate diagnostic capabilities across multiple vehicle platforms. What she wouldn't mention, because she genuinely didn't know, was that the foundational technologies underlying all these achievements had been developed by a single engineer whose contributions had been systematically erased from corporate history. Cassandra's worldview was shaped by privilege so complete that she rarely questioned the origins of her success. Whitmore Technologies had achieved market dominance through superior engineering and smart business decisions. That was the narrative she'd absorbed from board meetings and strategic planning sessions. The possibility that their technological advantages might have been obtained through questionable means had never occurred to her, partly because no one had ever challenged their patent claims and partly because such challenges seemed impossible given their legal and financial resources. The McLaren started with the distinctive growl that only a twin-turbo V8 could produce, its engine management systems running diagnostic protocols that had been refined over years of development. Cassandra had driven this route to the airport dozens of times, navigating Manhattan traffic with the confidence of someone who'd never had to worry about mechanical failures or unexpected delays. Her cars were serviced by the most expensive specialists in the city, maintained to factory specifications by technicians who charged accordingly for their expertise. The drive to Teterboro Airport normally took 45 minutes, allowing Cassandra time to make phone calls and review documents while her car's autonomous systems handled the routine aspects of navigation. This morning's agenda included confirming meeting times with West Coast executives, reviewing contract terms for potential licensing deals, and discussing expansion strategies with her head of international business development. But as Cassandra accelerated onto the FDR drive, preparing for another day of high-stakes negotiations and corporate maneuvering, she had no way of knowing that her carefully planned trip would end not in a boardroom overlooking Silicon Valley, but in a small-town garage where a man with grease-stained coveralls would challenge everything Cassandra believed about expertise, achievement, and the true source of Whitmore Technologies' success. The morning traffic was lighter than usual, and Cassandra made good time until she reached the Bronx, where construction delays began backing up the highway. This was the kind of minor inconvenience that her assistant usually anticipated and planned around, but today the construction had started earlier than scheduled. Cassandra checked her watch. She still had time to make her flight, but the buffer she preferred was disappearing with each passing minute. That's when the first warning light appeared on the McLaren's dashboard, a subtle amber indicator that most drivers would ignore, but that triggered an immediate response from the car's diagnostic systems. Cassandra noticed the light but wasn't concerned. Her car was maintained by specialists who charged premium rates precisely to prevent such problems. The service records showed that everything had been checked and updated just 2 weeks earlier by the most expensive McLaren service center in Manhattan. But as the traffic slowed to a crawl, more warning lights began appearing on the dashboard, and Cassandra felt the first flutter of genuine concern about her carefully planned schedule. The engine began running rough, and she could hear unusual noises coming from under the hood, sounds that suggested something was seriously wrong with her $250,000 supercar. Steam began rising from the engine bay as Cassandra finally reached an exit that would take her away from the stalled highway traffic. Her perfect morning was dissolving into mechanical crisis, and her important California meetings were suddenly in jeopardy because of a car that was supposed to be the pinnacle of automotive reliability and performance. The McLaren's engine began making an ominous grinding sound as Cassandra finally cleared the construction zone just 20 miles outside of Pine Harbor. What had started as minor warning lights had escalated into a cascade of system failures that even someone with Cassandra's limited technical knowledge could recognize as serious trouble. The steering felt heavy, the engine was running rough, and steam had begun rising from under the hood. A combination of symptoms that meant her expensive supercar was about to become an expensive paperweight. Cassandra pulled into the first exit she saw, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the steering wheel as she guided the failing McLaren down a rural off-ramp that led toward a small town she'd never heard of. Her phone showed 2 bars of signal and a rapidly approaching deadline for her flight to California. The meetings she was supposed to attend represented months of preparation and millions of dollars in potential licensing deals that couldn't be rescheduled without significant political and financial consequences. Her first call went to her regular McLaren service center in Manhattan, where the service manager expressed sympathy but pointed out the obvious problem. They were 200 miles away, and having the car towed back to the city would take most of the day. Her second call went to the McLaren dealership nearest to her current location, which turned out to be 90 miles away in Albany and couldn't send a technician until the following morning. Her third call went to her assistant Marcus, who began frantically researching automotive service options in the Pine Harbor area while Cassandra sat in her disabled supercar, watching steam rise from the engine bay and feeling her carefully controlled schedule disintegrating. There are 3 automotive repair shops in Pine Harbor, Marcus reported after 10 minutes of research. 2 are basic oil change places that probably can't handle a McLaren. But there's one called Valley Motors that advertises European and luxury vehicle service. The reviews are actually quite good, though most of them are for more conventional cars. Cassandra looked around at the rural landscape surrounding the highway exit, rolling hills dotted with farms, a gas station that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1980s, and a small town in the distance that seemed to exist in a different century from the Manhattan skyscrapers she'd left that morning. The idea of entrusting her $250,000 car to some small-town garage felt absurd, but the alternative was missing meetings that could determine Whitmore Technologies' expansion into the electric vehicle market. "Get me directions to this Valley Motors," Cassandra said, resignation creeping into her voice, "and see if you can reschedule my first meeting to later this afternoon." The drive to Valley Motors took 15 minutes at reduced speed, with the McLaren's engine growing increasingly unhappy about being operated in its current condition. Cassandra's frustration mounted with each passing mile as she took in the small-town scenery, modest houses with practical cars in the driveways, local businesses that had clearly been serving the same community for decades, and an overall atmosphere of rural simplicity that seemed incompatible with high-performance automotive technology. Valley Motors sat at the end of a gravel driveway, a modest building that looked exactly like what Cassandra had expected to find in a town like Pine Harbor. The exterior showed signs of recent maintenance, fresh paint on the metal siding and professionally lettered signs, but it was clearly a small operation that probably specialized in pickup trucks and family sedans. Cassandra's heart sank as she realized she was about to entrust her sophisticated supercar to what appeared to be a basic automotive repair shop. She pulled into the parking area and climbed out of the McLaren, immediately aware of how out of place she looked in her tailored business suit and Italian leather shoes. Her appearance had been carefully chosen for boardroom meetings with automotive executives, not for standing in a gravel parking lot explaining complex mechanical problems to small-town mechanics who probably had never seen a McLaren, much less worked on one. The garage door was open, and Cassandra could see someone working under the hood of an older sedan, but the person's back was turned and she couldn't make out any details. She walked toward the entrance, her heels clicking on the concrete floor, and cleared her throat to announce her presence. "Excuse me," Cassandra called out, her voice carrying the crisp authority she used in business meetings. "I need someone to look at my car immediately. It's a McLaren 720S, and it's having some kind of engine problem." The figure under the hood straightened up and turned around, revealing a man in coveralls with grease-stained hands and dark hair showing early silver at the temples. Diego Vasquez wiped his hands on a shop rag and approached Cassandra with the calm professionalism of someone accustomed to dealing with stressed customers and expensive cars. "I'm Diego," he said simply. "What kind of symptoms are you experiencing?" Cassandra felt a moment of relief as she processed the fact that the mechanic seemed competent and professional, despite the modest surroundings. His demeanor suggested experience with sophisticated vehicles, and his direct approach to diagnosing the problem was reassuring after her morning of mechanical frustration. "It started with warning lights," Cassandra explained, trying to keep the frustration out of her voice. "Now the engine is making grinding noises, and there's steam coming from under the hood. I have extremely important meetings in California this afternoon, and I need this fixed immediately." Diego nodded and walked toward the McLaren, his practice. Diego stood perfectly still for a moment, his dark eyes studying Cassandra's face with the same analytical intensity he brought to diagnosing complex mechanical problems. The garage fell silent, except for the distant hum of diagnostic equipment and the tick of cooling metal from the McLaren's overheated engine. Zara, who had been quietly working on her laptop in the office corner, looked up with curiosity at the sudden tension that had filled the space. "You can't fire me," Diego said finally, his voice carrying a calm certainty that seemed to deflate some of Cassandra's corporate bluster. "I don't work for you. I own this business, and I choose my customers based on whether they respect my expertise and my time." Cassandra felt a flush of embarrassment as she realized the absurdity of her threat. Her corporate instincts had kicked in automatically, defaulting to the power dynamics she was accustomed to wielding in boardrooms and business negotiations. But here, in this small-town garage, those dynamics didn't apply. Diego wasn't an employee who could be intimidated or a vendor who depended on Whitmore Technologies, continued business. However, Diego continued, walking back to the McLaren and reopening the hood. "I understand that you're under pressure, and I respect that important business deals sometimes require creative solutions." He reached into the engine bay and began pointing out specific components while maintaining the running commentary of someone who understood every system intimately. "Your fuel injectors are receiving incorrect signals from the engine management computer because someone uploaded the wrong firmware during your last service. The diagnostic protocols show error codes that indicate a mismatch between the injector specifications and the control algorithms." Cassandra moved closer, drawn despite herself by the technical precision of Diego's explanation. "How can you read diagnostic codes without connecting any equipment?" "Because the error patterns are visible in the engine behavior if you know what to look for," Diego replied, his hands moving through the engine bay with practiced confidence. "The timing of the rough idle corresponds to specific cylinders firing out of sequence. The cooling system failure is secondary. It's being caused by the engine running rich due to the fuel injection problems." Diego walked to his diagnostic station and pulled up a complex interface on his computer screen. The display showed real-time data streams from sensors throughout the McLaren systems, painting a detailed picture of exactly what was happening inside the engine. Cassandra stared at the screen, recognizing some of the parameters but lacking the expertise to interpret the relationships between different data points. "This is Whitmore Technologies' diagnostic protocol," Diego said quietly, his fingers moving across the keyboard with the fluency of someone who had written the original code. "Version 4.2, released in 2020. I can tell because of the way it handles transient pressure variations in the fuel rail and the specific error handling routines for hybrid system integration." Cassandra felt something cold settling in her stomach. How could you possibly know the version number of proprietary software? Diego's expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes suggested depths that Cassandra was only beginning to glimpse. "Because I wrote version 4.2, and versions 3.1 through 4.1, and the original architecture that all of them are built on." The claim seemed impossible, but Diego's casual familiarity with the diagnostic interface suggested knowledge that went far beyond what any external mechanic should possess. Cassandra watched as Diego navigated through software menus with the confidence of someone who had designed them, accessing diagnostic routines that Cassandra hadn't known existed. "The problem with your car," Diego continued, pulling up another screen that showed engine performance maps, "is that your Manhattan Service Center uploaded firmware designed for the European market version of the McLaren 720S. The fuel injection timing is calibrated for different octane ratings and environmental standards. It's a common mistake when technicians don't understand the underlying system architecture." Diego's diagnosis was accompanied by specific technical details that demonstrated intimate knowledge of both the McLaren systems and the diagnostic protocols that governed them. He explained how the incorrect firmware was causing the engine to run rich, which increased combustion temperatures and put additional stress on the cooling system. The water pump failure was a consequence of the overheating, not a separate problem. "Can you fix it?" Cassandra asked, her skepticism beginning to give way to cautious hope. "I can restore the correct firmware in about 10 minutes, Diego replied, connecting a specialized interface device to the McLaren's diagnostic port. "But the water pump will need to be replaced, and that requires parts one don't have in stock." Cassandra checked her watch again, calculating travel times and meeting schedules. "If you can get the engine running properly, I can have the cooling system repaired in California. How confident are you that the firmware fix will work?" Diego's fingers flew across the keyboard as he accessed the McLaren's engine management system. "Completely confident. I'm not guessing about this. I'm correcting an error in software I originally designed." The diagnostic interface showed Diego downloading the incorrect firmware and replacing it with what appeared to be the correct version. But Cassandra noticed something unusual. Diego wasn't accessing the firmware from Whitmore Technologies, official servers, or using any kind of authorized service interface. Instead, he seemed to be working from locally stored files that contained the correct software versions. "Where did you get the replacement firmware?" Cassandra asked, her curiosity overriding her previous skepticism. "I keep backups of all the diagnostic software I've worked on," Diego replied without looking up from his screen. "It's a habit from my engineering days, when version control was critical for tracking changes and debugging problems." As Diego worked, Cassandra found herself studying the garage with new attention to detail. What she had initially dismissed as standard automotive equipment revealed itself to be far more sophisticated upon closer inspection. The diagnostic computers were running advanced analysis software that rivaled what Whitmore Technologies used in their corporate laboratories. The test equipment arranged around Diego's workstation represented hundreds of thousands of dollars in precision instruments that seemed wildly out of place in a small-town garage. Zara approached from the office area carrying a tablet that displayed real-time engine performance data. "Dad, the fuel mixture is already improving. Cylinder temperatures are dropping back to normal ranges." Cassandra stared at the 16-year-old girl who was casually interpreting complex engine diagnostics with the competence of a trained technician. "Your daughter understands automotive engineering?" "Zara's been learning diagnostic procedures since she was 12, Diego replied, making final adjustments to the firmware installation. "She has a natural talent for pattern recognition and systems analysis." The McLaren's engine note began changing as Diego's software corrections took effect. The rough idle smoothed out, and the grinding noises that had alarmed Cassandra during her drive to Pine Harbor gradually disappeared. Within 8 minutes of beginning the firmware restoration, Diego had the engine running with the smooth precision that McLaren owners expected from their $250,000 supercars. "Try starting it now," Diego instructed, disconnecting his diagnostic equipment and closing the hood. Cassandra climbed into the McLaren and turned the key, immediately noticing the difference in how the engine responded. The rough idle was gone, replaced by the steady purr that indicated all systems were functioning within normal parameters. The dashboard warning lights had disappeared, and the engine temperature gauge showed readings within the normal range. "This is remarkable," Cassandra said, genuinely impressed despite her initial skepticism. "You've accomplished more in 10 minutes than my Manhattan Service Center managed in an entire day of diagnostics." Diego wiped his hands on a shop rag, his expression remaining professionally neutral despite the compliment. "The diagnostic protocols make this kind of repair straightforward if you understand the underlying system architecture. Most service centers treat the software as a black box and just follow troubleshooting flowcharts without understanding what the code is actually doing." Cassandra sat in her restored McLaren, processing the implications of what she'd just witnessed. Diego had demonstrated expertise that surpassed certified McLaren technicians, using diagnostic software with intimate familiarity, and claiming to have designed the very systems that powered Cassandra's car. The technical competence was undeniable, but the broader questions about Diego's background were becoming more intriguing and troubling. "I owe you an apology," Cassandra said, stepping out of the car to face Diego directly. "I made assumptions about your capabilities based on appearances, and I was completely wrong." Diego nodded, accepting the apology without apparent satisfaction or resentment. "It happens more often than you might think. People see a small-town garage and assume the work must be basic. They don't consider that someone might choose this environment for reasons that have nothing to do with their technical qualifications." As Cassandra prepared to continue her journey to California, she found herself reluctant to leave without understanding more about the man who had just solved a problem that had stumped expensive specialists. Diego's casual expertise with Whitmore Technologies' diagnostic protocols raised questions that went far beyond automotive repair, and Cassandra's curiosity was beginning to override her business schedule. "Could I ask you something?" Cassandra said, her voice carrying genuine interest rather than corporate politeness. "Where did you learn diagnostic engineering at this level?" Diego looked at Cassandra for a long moment, seeming to weigh something in his mind. The question about his background hung in the air between them, carrying implications that went far beyond casual curiosity. Zara glanced up from her tablet, recognizing the familiar tension that appeared whenever someone asked about their family's past. "That's a complicated story," Diego said finally, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone who had learned to be cautious about sharing personal history. "Let's just say I used to work in automotive engineering before I came to Pine Harbor." Cassandra noticed the deflection but also recognized something in Diego's tone that suggested deeper currents beneath the surface. Her business instincts, honed by years of corporate negotiations, told her that Diego was being deliberately vague about something significant. The technical expertise she'd just witnessed didn't develop overnight, and the sophisticated equipment hidden throughout the garage suggested resources that went far beyond what a typical small-town mechanic could afford. "I don't mean to pry," Cassandra said, then immediately contradicted herself by doing exactly that. "But your knowledge of Whitmore Technologies' diagnostic protocols is remarkably detailed. Have you worked with our systems before?" The question seemed to hit Diego like a physical blow, though he covered his reaction quickly. Zara's head snapped up from her tablet, her eyes moving between her father and Cassandra with obvious concern. The family clearly had experience navigating questions about Diego's background, and Cassandra's mention of Whitmore Technologies had triggered some kind of internal alarm system. "I'm familiar with most automotive diagnostic platforms," Diego replied carefully. "Whitmore Technologies' protocols are widely used throughout the industry." Cassandra sensed that she was touching on something sensitive, but her curiosity had been awakened by the contradiction between Diego's current circumstances and his obvious expertise. The casual way Diego had navigated through Whitmore's proprietary software suggested familiarity that went far beyond general industry knowledge. "Would you mind if I stayed and watched you work for a while?" Cassandra asked, surprising herself with the request. "I mean, I should probably get to the airport, but honestly, I'm fascinated by your diagnostic approach. In my position at Whitmore Technologies, I see a lot of technical presentations, but I rarely get to watch someone actually solving problems in real time." Diego hesitated, glancing at Zara, who was watching the conversation with the intense attention she brought to all adult interactions that might affect their family's stability. The garage had become their sanctuary, a place where Diego could practice his craft without constantly explaining his background or defending his qualifications. Inviting Cassandra to observe their work process felt like opening a door that might be difficult to close again. "You're welcome to stay," Diego said finally, "but I should warn you that real diagnostic work isn't particularly glamorous. Most of it involves systematic elimination of possibilities rather than dramatic breakthroughs." Cassandra checked her phone, calculating the implications of missing her first California meeting against the opportunity to understand how Diego had diagnosed and repaired her McLaren with such efficiency. Her assistant Marcus had managed to reschedule the most critical appointments to later in the afternoon, giving her several hours before she absolutely had to be at the airport. "I'd like to see how you approach a complex problem," Cassandra said, settling into one of the plastic chairs that Diego kept for customers. "If you don't mind having an audience." Diego's next customer arrived 20 minutes later driving a hybrid Toyota that had been experiencing intermittent electrical problems for weeks. The owner, a local teacher named Mr. Rodriguez, explained that two different dealerships had been unable to identify the source of random system failures that left him stranded unpredictably. "The symptoms sound like classic ground loop interference," Diego told Cassandra as he began connecting diagnostic equipment to the Toyota. Hybrid vehicles have complex electrical systems with multiple high-voltage circuits. If there's a grounding problem, it can cause cascading failures that are difficult to trace because they don't follow predictable patterns. Cassandra watched as Diego methodically worked through the diagnostic process, starting with basic electrical measurements and gradually building a comprehensive picture of how the vehicle's various systems were interacting. What impressed Cassandra most was Diego's systematic approach. Rather than guessing or trying random solutions, he was building a logical case based on measurable data. "See this voltage reading?" Diego pointed to a display on his oscilloscope. "The battery management system is detecting micro-fluctuations that shouldn't exist in a properly grounded circuit. But watch what happens when I activate the air conditioning." Diego turned on the Toyota's climate control system, and immediately the voltage readings changed in ways that Cassandra couldn't interpret, but that clearly meant something significant to Diego. "The grounding problem is in the AC compressor circuit," Diego announced confidently. "When the compressor kicks in, it's creating electrical noise that interferes with the hybrid battery's control systems. That's why Mr. Rodriguez's car fails randomly. It only happens when the AC is running and the hybrid system is trying to switch between electric and gasoline power." Cassandra found herself genuinely impressed by the logical progression of Diego's diagnosis. "How long did it take you to develop this kind of systematic approach?" Diego smiled for the first time since Cassandra had arrived, his professional reserve warming slightly. "About 15 years of making mistakes and learning from them. Diagnostic work is like solving puzzles, except the pieces keep changing shape, and some of them are deliberately trying to mislead you." As Diego worked on the Toyota's grounding problem, Cassandra began to understand why Diego's repair of her McLaren had been so effective. The methodical approach, the deep understanding of system interactions, and the ability to see patterns that others missed weren't skills that developed from following service manuals. They came from years of engineering experience at the highest levels of automotive technology. Zara approached with fresh coffee for both adults, her presence reminding Cassandra of the family dynamic that seemed central to Diego's current life. "Dad, the diagnostic routine finished running on the Corvette project. The new fuel mapping is showing significant efficiency improvements." "What's the Corvette project?" Cassandra asked, intrigued by yet another indication that Diego's work extended far beyond basic automotive repair. Diego hesitated again, but Zara answered with the directness that characterized her communication style. "Dad's rebuilding a 1967 Stingray with modern diagnostic systems and performance enhancements. He's basically creating a classic car that performs better than most contemporary supercars." Cassandra felt her curiosity spike again. The technical challenge of integrating modern systems into a vintage platform required engineering expertise that went far beyond mechanical restoration. "Could I see it?" Diego led Cassandra to a corner of the garage where a partially assembled Corvette sat under a protective cover. When he pulled the cover back, Cassandra saw immediately that this wasn't a typical restoration project. The engine bay contained a sophisticated array of sensors, control modules, and diagnostic interfaces that represented cutting-edge automotive technology seamlessly integrated into the classic vehicle's architecture. "This is remarkable," Cassandra said, studying the custom installation with growing amazement. "You've essentially created a modern supercar using a vintage chassis. The level of systems integration must have required extensive programming and calibration work." "It's been a 3-year project," Diego replied, his professional reserve dropping as he discussed work that was clearly a passion rather than just a job. The challenge was maintaining the car's original character while adding modern performance and diagnostic capabilities. "Everything you see here uses proprietary control algorithms that I developed specifically for this application." Cassandra examined the Corvette's diagnostic interface, immediately recognizing that the software architecture bore striking similarities to Whitmore Technologies' proprietary systems. The user interface design, the data presentation methods, and even the underlying code structure seemed familiar in ways that made her increasingly uncomfortable. "Diego," Cassandra said slowly, her voice carrying a new seriousness. "I need to ask you something directly, and I'd appreciate an honest answer. Have you ever worked for Whitmore Technologies?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Cassandra watched as Diego's expression shifted from professional courtesy to something much more guarded. Zara looked up from her laptop with obvious concern, recognizing that the conversation had just taken a turn that could affect their family's carefully constructed new life. Diego was quiet for a long moment, his hands resting on the Corvette's fender as he seemed to wrestle with a decision about how much truth he was willing to share with a stranger who represented the very company that had shaped their current circumstances. "Yes," Diego said finally, his voice steady despite the weight of the admission. "I used to work for Whitmore Technologies, a long time ago." Cassandra felt the garage suddenly grow very quiet, as if Diego's admission had sucked all the ambient sound from the space. The admission hung between them with the weight of a confession, carrying implications that Cassandra was only beginning to understand. Zara had gone completely still at her laptop, her fingers frozen over the keyboard as she watched her father navigate territory that the family had spent 3 years avoiding. "When did you work for Whitmore Technologies?" Cassandra asked, her voice carefully neutral despite the growing tension she felt in her chest. Diego walked to his workbench and pulled out a worn folder from the bottom drawer, handling it with the careful reverence of someone preserving evidence of a previous life. "I was senior diagnostic engineer from 2015 to 2021. I led the team that developed the diagnostic protocols your McLaren was running today." He opened the folder and spread out technical documents that bore the Whitmore Technologies letterhead, patent applications, development reports, and engineering specifications that covered Diego's workbench-like evidence in a court case. Cassandra recognized the document formats immediately, having seen similar paperwork in countless board meetings and technical reviews. "These are the original development files for the diagnostic system architecture that Whitmore Technologies built their reputation on," Diego continued, his voice taking on the flat tone of someone recounting a painful history. "Every luxury vehicle manufacturer in the world licenses this technology from your company. It generates about $40 million in annual revenue." Cassandra leaned over the documents, reading technical specifications and development timelines that painted a picture of intensive engineering work spanning multiple years. Diego's name appeared throughout the paperwork as the primary inventor and lead developer, with contributions from a small team of supporting engineers. "Dr. Diego Vasquez," Cassandra read from one of the patent applications, looking up at Diego with growing understanding. "You held a doctorate in electrical engineering." "From MIT," Diego confirmed. "I specialized in automotive control systems and sensor integration." "The diagnostic protocols you're looking at represent 6 years of research and development work that I led personally." Zara had approached quietly, standing beside her father with the protective stance of someone ready to defend her family against whatever consequences might follow from these revelations. "Dad developed those systems before I was born," she added, her voice carrying a maturity that seemed beyond her 16 years. "He used to bring me to the lab when I was little, when he was working late on the calibration algorithms." Cassandra studied the patent documents more carefully, noting dates and inventor attributions that told a story of extensive individual contribution to what had become Whitmore Technologies' core competitive advantage. But something about the timeline bothered her. If Diego had been such a crucial contributor to Whitmore's success, why was he now working in a small-town garage instead of leading engineering teams in corporate research facilities? "What happened?" Cassandra asked, though she was beginning to suspect that the answer would be more complicated and painful than Diego's professional demeanor suggested. Diego's expression hardened as he pulled out another set of documents from the folder, legal papers that bore the letterhead of Whitmore Technologies, corporate law firm. "Your company's executive team decided that my contributions to the diagnostic systems weren't significant enough to warrant continued employment or recognition as primary inventor on the patent applications." Cassandra felt something cold settle in her stomach as she read through the legal documents. They contained termination notices, patent reassignments, and non-compete agreements that effectively stripped Diego of all credit for his work while preventing him from developing competing technologies for other companies. "This says you were terminated for performance issues and failure to meet project deadlines." Cassandra read, her voice growing troubled as she processed the implications. "The performance issues were invented after the fact," Diego replied, his professional composure beginning to crack slightly. "The real reason was that Miranda Blackstone, who was CFO at the time, wanted to consolidate patent ownership under Whitmore Technologies, corporate name rather than acknowledging individual contributors. It's easier to license technology when the company owns everything outright, rather than sharing royalties with the actual inventors. Cassandra recognized the name immediately. Miranda Blackstone had been her predecessor as CFO, having taken over financial operations when Cassandra's father expanded the company's international presence. She'd been forced to resign 3 years later following accusations of financial irregularities, but not before implementing policies that had shaped the company's current patent portfolio and licensing strategy. Miranda was also my ex-wife, Diego continued, his voice carrying years of suppressed bitterness. We divorced 6 months before Whitmore Technologies terminated my employment. The patent reassignments and non-compete agreements were part of the divorce settlement that she negotiated through the company's legal team. The revelation hit Cassandra like a physical blow. Diego hadn't just been terminated from Whitmore Technologies. He'd been systematically stripped of credit for his work by someone who had both corporate authority and personal leverage over his situation. The diagnostic technologies that had made Whitmore Technologies a dominant force in automotive engineering had been essentially stolen from their actual creator. Zara moved closer to her father, her protective instincts activated by the stress of revisiting painful family history. Mom used her position at the company to make sure Dad couldn't fight the patent reassignments or find work with any other automotive manufacturer, she said, her voice carrying anger that seemed too mature for her age. She made sure that if Dad wanted any kind of divorce settlement, he had to give up all claims to his engineering work. Cassandra studied the legal documents more carefully, noting clauses that went far beyond typical employment termination agreements. The non-compete provisions were so broadly written that they effectively prevented Diego from working in automotive engineering for any major manufacturer. The patent reassignments transferred ownership of Diego's innovations to Whitmore Technologies for a nominal payment that was less than most engineers earned in a single month. This is unconscionable, Cassandra said, her voice carrying genuine outrage as she understood the scope of what had been done to Diego. These agreements essentially forced you to choose between fighting for your intellectual property and securing any kind of financial stability for your family. Miranda knew I couldn't afford a legal battle while supporting Zara and dealing with the divorce, Diego replied. Whitmore Technologies had unlimited resources and a team of corporate lawyers whose job was to protect the company's interests. I had a daughter to raise and bills to pay, so I signed the agreements and tried to rebuild my life somewhere else. Cassandra felt her understanding of Whitmore Technologies, success shifting as she processed the reality of how their core technologies had been acquired. The diagnostic systems that powered their licensing empire hadn't been developed through corporate research and development. They'd been created by an individual engineer whose contributions had been systematically erased from company history. The diagnostic protocols in your McLaren, Diego continued, his voice gaining strength as he moved through the technical details, were based on algorithms I developed for handling real-time sensor data fusion. The software architecture that Whitmore Technologies licenses to luxury manufacturers worldwide is built on control system theory that I refined through years of research at MIT and practical application in Whitmore's labs. Diego pulled out another document from his folder, a technical manual that bore his name as the primary author. This is the original system specification that defined how automotive diagnostic protocols should integrate with vehicle control systems. Every luxury car manufacturer in the world now uses variations of these approaches, but Whitmore Technologies collects the licensing fees. Cassandra examined the technical manual, recognizing design principles and implementation strategies that had indeed become industry standards. The level of innovation represented in Diego's original work was staggering. He hadn't just contributed to Whitmore Technologies' success, he'd essentially created the intellectual foundation that the entire luxury automotive diagnostic industry was built on. The worst part, Zara added, her voice carrying the pain of someone who'd watched her brilliant father forced to rebuild his career from nothing, is that Dad continued innovating even after Whitmore Technologies stole his work. The diagnostic improvements he's made here at Valley Motors are better than anything Whitmore Technologies has developed since he left. Cassandra looked around the garage with new understanding, recognizing that Diego's sophisticated equipment and custom software represented continuing innovation in automotive diagnostics. Diego hadn't just been victimized by Whitmore Technologies. He'd continued advancing the field despite being cut off from corporate resources and recognition. Diego, Cassandra said slowly, processing the full implications of what she'd learned. The licensing deals I'm flying to California to negotiate are based entirely on technologies that you created. Whitmore Technologies is about to sign contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars for innovations that were stolen from their actual inventor. The weight of this realization settled over both of them as they contemplated the scope of the injustice that had been perpetrated and the ongoing consequences that continued to benefit Whitmore Technologies, while punishing Diego for his own creativity and expertise. Cassandra stood in the garage holding Diego's patent documents with hands that had begun to tremble slightly. The technical specifications and development timelines painted a picture that contradicted everything she thought she knew about Whitmore Technologies. Rise to dominance in automotive diagnostics. Her phone buzzed insistently with messages from her assistant Marcus, reminding her that her flight to California was departing in 3 hours, and that the executives waiting for her represented contracts worth more than most companies' annual revenue. But Cassandra found herself unable to move, paralyzed by the magnitude of what Diego had revealed. The man standing across from her, wearing grease-stained coveralls and working in a modest small-town garage, was the actual creator of the technologies that had made Cassandra's family wealthy beyond imagination. Every board meeting Cassandra had attended, every strategic planning session she'd led, every licensing deal she'd negotiated had been built on innovations stolen from the person now watching her with carefully guarded hope. "I need to make some phone calls," Cassandra said finally, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. She walked outside the garage, pulling out her phone with movements that felt mechanical and disconnected from her racing thoughts. Her first call went to Marcus, who answered with the crisp efficiency that had made him invaluable in managing her complex schedule. "Cassandra, I was just about to call you. The jet is being prepped, and I've confirmed all your meetings for this afternoon. The automotive executives are particularly excited about the new licensing opportunities for electric vehicle diagnostics." "Marcus, I need you to research something for me immediately," Cassandra interrupted, her voice carrying an urgency that made her assistant pause. "I want you to find every piece of documentation we have about the development of our core diagnostic protocols. Personnel files, development reports, patent applications, everything from 2015 to 2021. "That's a pretty broad request," Marcus replied, clearly puzzled by the sudden interest in historical documentation. "Is there something specific you're looking for?" Cassandra looked back toward the garage where Diego was visible through the open door, methodically organizing the patent documents while Zara worked quietly at her laptop. "I need to understand exactly who developed our diagnostic technologies and what happened to them after the patents were filed." Her second call went to Whitmore Technologies, head of legal affairs, Robert Chen, who handled intellectual property matters for the company. Cassandra had worked with Robert on numerous licensing deals, but had never questioned the underlying ownership of the technologies they were monetizing. "Robert, I need you to pull the complete file on our automotive diagnostic patent portfolio," Cassandra said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Specifically, I want to see all documentation related to Dr. Diego Vasquez, who worked for us from 2015 to 2021. There was a pause on the line that lasted long enough for Cassandra to wonder if the connection had been lost. When Robert spoke again, his voice carried the careful tone of someone navigating potentially sensitive territory. "That's a name I haven't heard in a while," Robert said slowly. "May I ask why you're interested in Dr. Vasquez's employment history?" The question itself felt like confirmation that Diego's story was more complex than routine personnel matters. "I'm trying to understand the development history of our diagnostic technologies. Dr. Vasquez appears to have been a significant contributor." "Cassandra, I think this conversation would be better handled in person," Robert replied, his legal training clearly activating in response to questions about potentially controversial personnel matters. "There are some aspects of Dr. Vasquez's departure that involve confidential settlement agreements." Cassandra felt her stomach drop as Robert's cautious response confirmed that Diego's termination had indeed involved the kind of legal complexities that companies preferred to keep buried in confidential files. "Robert, I need you to be completely honest with me. Was Dr. Vasquez's departure from Whitmore Technologies handled appropriately?" The silence on the line stretched long enough to answer Cassandra's question before Robert spoke again. "I would prefer to discuss this matter when you return from California. There are aspects of that situation that require careful consideration of legal and business implications." Cassandra ended the call feeling sick to her stomach. Robert's evasive responses and insistence on confidentiality suggested that Whitmore Technologies had indeed acted inappropriately in their treatment of Diego, and that the legal department was well aware of potential vulnerabilities in their patent claims. Her third call went to her uncle David Whitmore, who had served on the company's board of directors during the period when Diego's work was being developed. David had been her father's closest advisor and had helped guide Cassandra through her transition to CEO after her father's death. "Uncle David, I need to ask you about something sensitive," Cassandra began, her voice carrying the weight of family obligation and growing moral conflict. "Do you remember Dr. Diego Vasquez, who worked for us in the diagnostic systems department?" David's response was immediate and sharp. "Why are you asking about Diego Vasquez?" The tone of his voice told Cassandra everything she needed to know about the sensitivity of Diego's situation within Whitmore Technologies' corporate history. "I've learned some things about his work that are troubling me. Did we treat him fairly when he left the company?" Cassandra, Diego Vasquez was a disruptive employee who failed to meet his obligations and created problems for the company during a difficult period. David replied, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having his version of events accepted without question. Miranda Blackstone handled his departure appropriately, and his patent assignments were completed according to standard corporate procedures. But Cassandra had spent years learning to read between the lines in corporate communications, and David's defensive tone suggested that the official version of Diego's departure didn't tell the complete story. "Uncle David, I'm looking at documentation that suggests Diego was the primary creator of our diagnostic technologies. If that's true, then the way we handled his departure could expose us to significant legal and ethical problems." "Cassandra, you need to be very careful about reopening matters that were settled years ago," David warned, his voice taking on the sharp edge that appeared when family loyalty conflicted with business interests. Diego Vasquez signed comprehensive settlement agreements that resolved any claims he might have had against Whitmore Technologies. Questioning those agreements now could create problems that don't currently exist. Cassandra found herself caught between competing loyalties that seemed impossible to reconcile. Her family's wealth and her own position as CEO were built on technologies that appeared to have been stolen from their actual creator. But challenging that foundation would mean acknowledging wrongdoing that could destroy Whitmore Technologies and betray the trust of everyone who depended on the company's continued success. Diego appeared in the garage doorway, apparently finished with organizing the documents that told the story of his stolen innovations. He looked toward Cassandra with an expression that suggested he understood the moral conflict that was playing out in the phone calls, having witnessed similar struggles in his own life when principle conflicted with survival. "Ms. Whitmore," Diego called softly, "I know this is difficult. You don't have to choose sides in a fight that happened before you became CEO." Cassandra walked back toward the garage, her phone calls having confirmed Diego's story while revealing the depth of Whitmore Technologies' institutional resistance to acknowledging past wrongdoing. "But I do have to choose," Cassandra replied, her voice carrying the weight of someone facing a decision that would define not just her business future but her personal integrity. "I can't unknow what I know now." Zara looked up from her laptop, her teenage directness cutting through the adult complexities that surrounded Diego's situation. "Dad always says that doing the right thing isn't supposed to be easy. If it was easy, everyone would do it." Cassandra stood in the garage doorway, literally and figuratively balanced between two worlds. Behind her lay the comfortable certainty of corporate success, built on questionable foundations. In front of her stood a man whose genius had been stolen and whose life had been systematically dismantled by the very company Cassandra now led. Her phone buzzed again with another urgent message from Marcus about departure times and meeting schedules. The California executives were waiting for her to sign licensing deals that would generate hundreds of millions in revenue from Diego's stolen innovations. But for the first time in her corporate career, Cassandra found herself questioning whether financial success justified perpetuating an injustice that had already caused profound damage to an innocent family. The weight of her decision pressed down on her as she realized that whatever choice she made would have consequences that extended far beyond her own life. If she walked away and continued with business as usual, she would be complicit in ongoing theft that had already destroyed Diego's career and forced him into exile. If she chose to expose the truth, she would be risking everything her family had built while potentially destroying the livelihoods of thousands of employees who depended on Whitmore Technologies for their survival. "Diego," Cassandra said finally, her voice carrying a resolve that surprised her with its strength. "If you're willing to help me understand the full scope of what was done to you, I want to try to make this right." Diego studied Cassandra's face for a long moment, searching for signs of the corporate calculation that had characterized their earlier interactions. What he saw instead was something he hadn't expected: genuine moral conviction mixed with the kind of determined anger that came from discovering you'd been living a lie. "If you're serious about this," Diego said carefully, "you need to understand what you're up against. Whitmore Technologies has spent years building legal and financial barriers around the technologies I developed. They've structured their patent portfolio and licensing agreements specifically to prevent challenges to their ownership claims." Cassandra pulled out her phone and canceled her California flights with a series of terse text messages to Marcus, each one representing millions of dollars in potential licensing revenue that she was choosing to abandon. "Then we'll have to find a way to go around those barriers." Zara looked up from her laptop with the intense focus she brought to complex problems. "Dad, what about the International Automotive Engineering Conference next month? All the major manufacturers will be there, plus automotive journalists and industry analysts. If we're going to challenge Whitmore Technologies publicly, that would be the perfect venue." Diego felt a familiar mix of excitement and terror at the thought of returning to the automotive engineering community that had been his professional home before Miranda's betrayal. The conference represented the most prestigious gathering in the industry, where breakthrough technologies were announced and future directions were debated by the field's leading experts. The conference would definitely provide the right audience, Diego agreed, his mind already working through the logistical challenges. But Whitmore Technologies will be there too, probably with a major presentation about their latest diagnostic innovations. We'd be challenging them on their home turf, in front of people who've been buying their narrative for years. Cassandra was already pulling up the conference website on her phone, scanning through the agenda and presenter list. "Actually, that might work in our favor. If we can demonstrate that you're the actual creator of their core technologies, it'll be much harder for them to dismiss the claims as baseless litigation." The three of them spent the next hour developing a strategy that would require careful coordination and significant risks for everyone involved. Diego would need to prepare a technical presentation that demonstrated his mastery of the diagnostic systems in ways that would be impossible for someone who hadn't created them. Cassandra would need to use her industry connections to secure a speaking slot at the conference while simultaneously gathering evidence of Whitmore Technologies' systematic appropriation of Diego's work. "I'll need access to Whitmore Technologies' internal development files," Diego said, reviewing the scope of what they were attempting. "The strongest proof would be showing that their published innovations are built on algorithms and system architectures that I documented years before they filed their patents." Cassandra nodded, already calculating how she could use her CEO access to gather the necessary evidence without triggering corporate security protocols. "I can get you the development files, but we'll need to be careful about how we use them. If Whitmore Technologies realizes what we're planning, they'll mobilize their legal team to prevent any public challenge." Zara had been quietly researching conference logistics while the adults planned their strategy. "Dad, I found something interesting. The conference has a special session for emerging innovators, where they showcase breakthrough technologies that could reshape the industry. The application deadline is next week, but if we can get accepted, it would give you a platform to present your work alongside the most respected engineers in the field." Diego felt his heart rate accelerate as he considered the possibility of returning to the professional community that had defined his identity before Miranda's betrayal forced him into exile. The thought of presenting his innovations to colleagues who might remember his previous work was both thrilling and terrifying. "There's another advantage to the Emerging Innovator session," Cassandra added, studying the conference details more carefully. "The presentations are broadcast live to the entire automotive industry, and the proceedings are published in the industry's most prestigious technical journal. If you can prove your claims in that forum, Whitmore Technologies won't be able to contain the story within their corporate communications." Diego walked to his workbench and pulled out the technical specifications for his custom Corvette project, the vehicle that represented years of continued innovation despite being cut off from corporate resources. "I could use the Corvette as a demonstration platform. It's running diagnostic systems that are more advanced than anything Whitmore Technologies has developed since I left." Cassandra studied the Corvette's technical documentation, recognizing innovations that surpass the current state-of-the-art in automotive diagnostics. This is perfect. You're not just claiming to have developed their existing technologies. You're demonstrating that you've continued advancing the field beyond anything they've achieved. The scope of their plan began to crystallize as they worked through the details. Diego would present his diagnostic innovations using the Corvette as a live demonstration platform, while Cassandra would simultaneously release documentation proving that Whitmore Technologies' core patents were based on Diego's stolen work. The combination of technical demonstration and documentary evidence would create a compelling case that would be difficult for Whitmore Technologies to dismiss or discredit. "We'll need allies within the industry," Diego said, thinking through the political dynamics that would influence how their revelations were received. Whitmore Technologies has relationships with every major automotive manufacturer. If they can convince people that I'm a disgruntled former employee making false claims, they might be able to weather the controversy. Cassandra was already scrolling through her contacts, identifying engineers and executives who might be sympathetic to their cause. "I know several people who've had concerns about Whitmore Technologies' business practices. They've been too intimidated to speak out publicly, but if we can provide proof of systematic fraud, they might be willing to support our position." Zara had been researching social media strategies while her father and Cassandra planned their professional approach. "We should also document everything we're doing and share it online. If this becomes a legal battle, public support could be crucial for preventing Whitmore Technologies from using their resources to silence you." Diego felt both excitement and apprehension as he considered the magnitude of what they were planning. After 3 years of quiet exile in Pine Harbor, he was preparing to challenge one of the most powerful companies in the automotive industry, risking the peaceful life he'd built for himself and Zara. "There's something else we need to consider," Diego said, his voice carrying the weight of hard-won experience with corporate retaliation. "Once we start this process, Whitmore Technologies will try to destroy my credibility and discredit my claims. They have unlimited resources and a legal team that specializes in protecting the company's interests." Cassandra met Diego's eyes directly, her expression showing the kind of determination that had made her successful in corporate negotiations. "Then we'll have to make sure our case is so strong that they can't discredit it. We'll need documentation, witness testimony, and technical demonstrations that prove your claims beyond any reasonable doubt." As evening approached, the three of them had developed a comprehensive strategy for exposing the truth about Diego's stolen innovations. The plan would require careful coordination, significant personal risks, and perfect execution under intense scrutiny from the automotive industry's most powerful interests. But for the first time since Miranda's betrayal had destroyed his corporate career, Diego felt something he'd almost forgotten: hope that justice might actually be possible and that his years of quiet innovation and exile might finally receive the recognition they deserved. Cassandra looked around the modest garage that had become the center of their revolutionary planning, recognizing that this small-town auto repair shop was about to become ground zero for a confrontation that could reshape the entire automotive diagnostics industry. The single father who had been dismissed and exiled was about to reclaim his rightful place as one of the field's most innovative minds. "When do we start?" Cassandra asked, her voice carrying the resolve of someone who had made an irreversible decision to choose integrity over comfort. Diego smiled for the first time since Cassandra's ultimatum had brought them together that morning, his expression showing both determination and the quiet pride of a father who was finally ready to fight for his daughter's future. "We start tonight." The International Automotive Engineering Conference occupied the entire Detroit Convention Center, where 4,000 of the industry's most influential engineers, executives, and journalists had gathered to witness the unveiling of breakthrough technologies that would shape the future of automotive innovation. Diego stood in the staging area behind the main auditorium, his hands steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to attempt. The custom Corvette sat under bright staging lights, its engine bay open to reveal the sophisticated diagnostic systems he'd developed in his small-town garage. Zara adjusted the wireless microphone clipped to Diego's blazer, her teenage face showing the kind of focused intensity she brought to complex technical challenges. "Dad, the diagnostic interface is showing green across all systems. The presentation software is loaded and ready, and I've got the backup drives in case anything goes wrong with the primary setup." Cassandra approached from the conference registration area, her expression tense but determined. "Whitmore Technologies just arrived," she announced quietly. "Miranda Blackstone is here with their head of engineering and a full legal team. They're setting up in the VIP section, and word is already spreading that there might be some kind of confrontation during your presentation. Diego felt his stomach tighten at the mention of Miranda's name, but forced himself to focus on the technical demonstration he'd rehearsed dozens of times over the past month. Are the automotive journalists positioned where they can see everything clearly? Front row center, Cassandra confirmed. I've also arranged for the presentation to be recorded from multiple angles, so there will be complete documentation of everything you demonstrate. Rebecca Martinez from Automotive Engineering Weekly is particularly interested in your story. She's been investigating Whitmore Technologies' patent practices for months. The conference moderator appeared at Diego's shoulder, checking his schedule and glancing nervously toward the packed auditorium. Dr. Vasquez, you're scheduled to begin in 5 minutes. The Emerging Innovator session is running exactly on schedule, and the live broadcast is reaching automotive professionals in 37 countries. Diego took a deep breath, drawing on the confidence that came from absolute certainty about his technical expertise. He'd spent 3 years perfecting the diagnostic systems he was about to demonstrate, building on innovations that Whitmore Technologies had claimed as their own, while advancing the field far beyond anything they'd achieved since his departure. The auditorium fell silent as Diego walked onto the stage, wheeling a sophisticated diagnostic cart beside the Corvette that served as his demonstration platform. The audience contained faces he recognized from his previous career. Colleagues who had respected his work before Miranda's betrayal forced him into exile. Executives who had profited from licensing his stolen innovations, and journalists who would determine how the story was reported to the broader industry. Ladies and gentlemen, Diego began, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium's sound system. I'm Dr. Diego Vasquez, and I'm here to demonstrate diagnostic technologies that represent the next generation of automotive system integration. But before I show you what's possible, I need to tell you a story about innovation, theft, and the consequences of prioritizing corporate profits over engineering integrity. A murmur ran through the audience as Diego's introduction made clear that this would be more than a typical technical presentation. In the VIP section, Miranda Blackstone leaned forward in her seat, her expression darkening as she realized what Diego was planning to reveal. 6 years ago, I developed the diagnostic protocols that have become industry standard for luxury vehicle system integration, quote, Diego continued, connecting his laptop to the conference's presentation system. These innovations generate approximately $40 million in annual licensing revenue for Whitmore Technologies, despite the fact that I was systematically denied credit for my contributions and forced out of the company through legal maneuvering designed to steal my intellectual property. Onshore. The auditorium erupted in surprised conversation as Diego's accusations challenged fundamental assumptions about one of the industry's most successful technology companies. Cassandra watched from the side of the stage as automotive executives began pulling out phones to research Diego's claims, while journalists activated recording devices to capture every word. Diego activated the Corvette's diagnostic systems, and immediately the large screen surrounding the stage filled with real-time data displays that showed engine performance metrics, sensor readings, and system integration status reports. What you're seeing is diagnostic technology that surpasses anything currently available in production vehicles, Diego announced, his voice gaining confidence as he moved into technical territory where his expertise was unquestionable. The diagnostic protocols running this demonstration are built on algorithms I developed at Whitmore Technologies between 2015 and 2021, Diego continued, manipulating the software interface with the fluency of someone who had written every line of code. But the implementations you're seeing today represent 3 years of continued innovation that I've pursued independently, advancing the field far beyond what Whitmore Technologies has achieved since appropriating my original work. Diego began demonstrating capabilities that left the audience of automotive engineers visibly amazed. The diagnostic systems could predict component failures weeks before they occurred, optimize engine performance in real time based on driving conditions, and integrate multiple vehicle systems in ways that improved both efficiency and reliability. Dr. Vasquez called out Dr. Jennifer Walsh from the audience, a respected engineer who had worked with Diego years earlier. Can you explain how your current diagnostic approach differs from Whitmore Technologies' published methodologies? Diego smiled, recognizing an opportunity to demonstrate knowledge that could only come from having created the original technologies. Whitmore Technologies' current systems are limited to reactive diagnostics. They identify problems after symptoms appear. What I'm showing you today is predictive diagnostics, that can identify potential failures based on subtle pattern changes in sensor data that most systems ignore. Miranda Blackstone stood up in the VIP section, her face flushed with anger and what appeared to be growing panic. This presentation is based on proprietary information that Dr. Vasquez obtained through his employment at Whitmore Technologies, she announced, her voice carrying across the auditorium. His current claims represent a clear violation of non-disclosure agreements and patent restrictions. Diego had been expecting this intervention and was prepared with a response that would expose the weakness of Miranda's position. Ms. Blackstone, I'm demonstrating innovations that I've developed independently over the past 3 years, using only resources I've acquired through my own efforts. If these technologies are similar to Whitmore Technologies' proprietary systems, that's because both are based on engineering principles that I originated during my previous employment. Cassandra stepped forward from the side of the stage, her presence adding corporate credibility to Diego's technical demonstrations. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Cassandra Whitmore, current CEO of Whitmore Technologies. I'm here to confirm that Dr. Vasquez was indeed the primary developer of our core diagnostic technologies, and that his departure from our company involved legal agreements that inappropriately transferred ownership of his innovations to Whitmore Technologies. The auditorium exploded in shocked conversation as Cassandra's statement contradicted everything the industry believed about Whitmore Technologies' technological development. Automotive journalists began frantically typing notes while executives pulled out phones to alert their companies about the unfolding controversy. Miranda's legal team huddled around her in urgent consultation, clearly unprepared for Cassandra's public acknowledgement of Diego's claims. They had expected to defend against accusations from a disgruntled former employee, not to face confirmation from Whitmore Technologies' current CEO that their patent claims were fraudulent. Diego continued his technical demonstration, showing diagnostic capabilities that proved his continued innovation, while Cassandra presented documentation that confirmed the theft of Diego's original work. The combination of current technical superiority and historical evidence created an overwhelming case that Whitmore Technologies had built their success on stolen intellectual property. The question facing our industry, Diego concluded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had proven their claims beyond any reasonable doubt, is whether we will continue to reward companies that appropriate individual innovations, or whether we will insist on integrity in how technological advancement is recognized and compensated. The applause that followed Diego's presentation was thunderous, but what mattered more was the immediate response from automotive manufacturers who began approaching the stage to discuss licensing Diego's advanced diagnostic technologies directly from their actual creator. The confrontation had succeeded beyond their most optimistic expectations, publicly vindicating Diego while exposing Whitmore Technologies' fraudulent foundation. As the crowd surged forward to examine the Corvette's diagnostic systems more closely, Diego felt a profound sense of vindication that went beyond professional recognition. The single father who had been dismissed and exiled had reclaimed his rightful place as one of the industry's most innovative minds, while the company that had stolen his work faced complete exposure before the global automotive community. The conference floor erupted into chaos as automotive executives, journalists, and engineers crowded around Diego's demonstration station, while others formed urgent huddles to discuss the implications of what they just witnessed. Within minutes of Diego's presentation ending, social media exploded with hashtags like #StolenInnovation and #DiagnosticTruth, while automotive news websites began publishing breaking stories about the Whitmore Technologies scandal. Miranda Blackstone's face had gone ashen as she watched her carefully constructed empire crumble in real time. Her legal team surrounded her in a protective huddle, their urgent whispers creating a bubble of panic in the VIP section that contrasted sharply with the excitement surrounding Diego's technical demonstration. Several major automotive manufacturers had already approached Cassandra to schedule emergency meetings about renegotiating their licensing agreements, effectively abandoning Whitmore Technologies before the presentation had even officially concluded. Dr. Rebecca Martinez from Automotive Engineering Weekly pushed through the crowd surrounding Diego, her recording device extended and her eyes bright with the excitement of a journalist who had just witnessed a career-defining story. Dr. Vasquez, can you comment on the immediate implications for the dozens of manufacturers who have licensing agreements with Whitmore Technologies based on your stolen innovations? Diego paused in disconnecting his diagnostic equipment, considering the scope of the question. Every licensing agreement that Whitmore Technologies has negotiated since 2015 is based on technologies that were fraudulently claimed as their corporate innovations. The manufacturers who signed those agreements are victims of Whitmore Technologies' deception, just as I was. Cassandra stepped closer to the growing crowd of journalists, her corporate training helping her navigate the media attention while supporting Diego's position. Whitmore Technologies will be immediately suspending all licensing operations while we conduct a comprehensive review of our patent portfolio. Any manufacturer currently paying licensing fees will receive full refunds until the ownership questions are resolved. The announcement sent shockwaves through the assembled executives, many of whom represented companies that had paid millions of dollars for technologies they now discovered had been stolen from their actual creator. Several German automotive engineers approached Diego directly, speaking in rapid technical discussions about implementing his advanced diagnostic systems in their upcoming vehicle platforms. Dr. Vasquez called out James Patterson from Mercedes-Benz North America, his voice carrying the urgency of someone trying to secure competitive advantage in a rapidly changing market. Would you be interested in discussing direct licensing arrangements for the diagnostic technologies you've demonstrated today? Our engineering team believes your predictive capabilities could revolutionize luxury vehicle maintenance. Diego found himself surrounded by executives representing the most prestigious automotive brands in the world, each eager to partner with him directly, rather than continuing their relationships with Whitmore Technologies. The irony wasn't lost on him. 3 years after being forced into exile and dismissed as unemployable, he was suddenly the most sought-after engineer in the automotive diagnostics field. Zara appeared at Diego's shoulder, carrying a tablet that showed the real-time social media explosion surrounding her father's vindication. "Dad, you're trending worldwide. The story is being covered by every major automotive publication, and engineers from dozens of companies are requesting meetings." Meanwhile, Miranda Blackstone's situation was deteriorating by the minute. As Whitmore Technologies, board members began calling emergency meetings, and major clients started demanding explanations for the fraud that had just been exposed. Her legal team was fielding calls from automotive manufacturers threatening lawsuits, while corporate partners began severing relationships to avoid association with the scandal. Cassandra watched the systematic dismantling of Whitmore Technologies' business relationships with a mixture of satisfaction and melancholy. The company her father had built and that she had inherited was collapsing, but she felt no regret about her decision to support Diego's quest for justice. The wealth and status she was losing had been built on a foundation of theft, and restoring Diego's rightful recognition was worth more than maintaining comfortable lives. "Cassandra," Diego said quietly, approaching her during a brief lull in the media attention, "I know this decision has cost you everything you inherited from your family. I want you to know that I understand what you've sacrificed to do the right thing." Cassandra smiled, feeling a sense of purpose she'd never experienced during her years of corporate leadership. "Actually, I think I'm gaining more than I'm losing. For the first time in my adult life, I'm proud of what I do for a living." The immediate business consequences were swift and devastating for Whitmore Technologies. By the end of the conference day, they had lost licensing agreements worth over $60 million in annual revenue. 3 major automotive manufacturers had announced they were terminating their contracts and pursuing direct relationships with Diego, while 2 others had filed preliminary legal actions demanding refunds for technologies they'd licensed under false pretenses. Diego's phone hadn't stopped ringing since the presentation ended, with calls from engineering headhunters, corporate executives, and journalists from around the world. Major automotive consulting firms were offering him positions that would restore him to the elite levels of the industry, while manufacturers were proposing licensing deals that would make him financially independent for life. Dr. Vasquez announced Dr. Patricia Williams from the conference organizing committee, approaching with obvious excitement. "The conference board would like to extend an invitation for you to deliver the keynote address at next year's conference. Your presentation today represents exactly the kind of breakthrough innovation that defines our industry's future." The invitation represented the ultimate professional vindication. Keynote speakers at the International Automotive Engineering Conference were reserved for the field's most respected innovators, and Diego's selection would signal his complete restoration to the industry's elite circles. Zara beamed with pride as she watched her father receive the recognition that had been stolen from him for years. "Dad, MIT's Dean of Engineering wants to offer you a full professorship with your own research lab. Harvard Business School wants to develop a case study about intellectual property theft, based on your story. As evening approached, Diego found himself exhausted but exhilarated by the day's events. The quiet mechanic who had been working in obscurity in Pine Harbor that morning was now the center of a global conversation about innovation, integrity, and corporate responsibility in the automotive industry. Miranda Blackstone made one final attempt to salvage her reputation, approaching Diego as he prepared to leave the conference center. Her legal team flanked her like bodyguards, their expressions showing the strain of managing a public relations disaster that was spiraling beyond their control. "Diego," Miranda said, her voice carrying a mixture of desperation and the entitlement that had characterized their marriage, "we can work something out privately. Whitmore Technologies is prepared to offer you a substantial settlement and recognition as co-inventor of our diagnostic technologies." Diego looked at his ex-wife with the calm certainty of someone who had already won everything that mattered. "Miranda, there's nothing to work out. The truth is public now, and the industry has made its judgment. Whitmore Technologies built its success on stolen work, and now you'll face the consequences of that choice." Cassandra stepped forward, her presence adding corporate authority to Diego's rejection of Miranda's desperate offer. "Whitmore Technologies will be filing for bankruptcy protection within the week. Our legal and financial obligations are far beyond what any settlement could address." As they left the convention center, Diego felt a profound sense of closure that went beyond professional vindication. The man who had been dismissed as a failed engineer was now recognized as one of the industry's most innovative minds, while the company that had stolen his work faced complete collapse. The drive back to Pine Harbor would give them time to process the magnitude of what had changed in a single day, and to plan for a future that suddenly held unlimited possibilities for success, recognition, and the kind of meaningful work that Diego had always dreamed of pursuing. The single father who had rebuilt his life from nothing was now positioned to provide his daughter with every opportunity she deserved, while proving that integrity and expertise could ultimately triumph over corporate power and systematic theft. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Diego's new research facility, a state-of-the-art engineering laboratory that occupied 3 floors of a gleaming technology center in Ann Arbor, Michigan. The sign outside read, "Vasquez Automotive Innovation Lab," and beneath it, in smaller letters, "Where Integrity Drives Discovery." Diego stood in his office, reviewing licensing agreements with 7 major automotive manufacturers who had approached him directly after the Whitmore Technologies scandal broke. The transformation had been remarkable in its speed and scope. Within weeks of the conference, Diego had been flooded with opportunities that validated everything he had accomplished during his years of exile in Pine Harbor. MIT had offered him a full professorship with tenure and unlimited research funding. Mercedes-Benz had proposed a 10-year exclusive licensing deal worth $50 million. Harvard Business School had developed a case study about his story that was now taught in ethics and intellectual property courses worldwide. But Diego had chosen a different path, one that honored both his newfound success and the community that had supported him during his most difficult years. The Vasquez Innovation Lab operated as an independent research facility that licensed breakthrough technologies directly to manufacturers while maintaining strong ties to Pine Harbor through an educational outreach program that brought advanced automotive training to small-town mechanics and students. Zara, now 17 and preparing for early admission to MIT's computer science program, managed the lab's digital operations with the same precision she'd brought to helping her father in the small garage. She'd become something of a celebrity herself, featured in magazines as a young innovator who had helped expose one of the automotive industry's biggest scandals while maintaining perfect grades and developing her own software applications. "Dad," Zara called from her workstation, where multiple monitors displayed real-time data from diagnostic tests running throughout the facility. "The Mercedes team is reporting 23% efficiency improvements with the new predictive algorithms. They want to expand the implementation to their entire luxury vehicle line." Diego smiled, feeling the deep satisfaction that came from seeing his innovations being used to solve real problems for millions of drivers worldwide. The diagnostic systems he'd developed in exile were now being integrated into vehicles from 12 different manufacturers, generating licensing revenue that had made him financially independent while advancing automotive technology in ways that benefited everyone. Cassandra appeared in the office doorway, carrying a folder of legal documents and wearing the expression of someone who had found unexpected purpose in their professional life. After Whitmore Technologies' collapse, she had joined Diego's operation as chief business officer, using her corporate experience to negotiate licensing deals and manage relationships with manufacturers who were eager to partner with the lab. Mays, the final settlement from Whitmore Technologies came through, Cassandra announced, setting the folder on Diego's desk. Miranda signed off on the bankruptcy agreements, and all the licensing revenue that should have gone to you over the past 6 years is being transferred to the lab's accounts. The settlement represented more than financial compensation. It was official acknowledgement that Diego's innovations had generated hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue that had been stolen through corporate fraud. The money would fund expanded research operations and educational programs that would benefit the next generation of automotive engineers. Diego opened the folder and reviewed the final documentation that closed the chapter on Whitmore Technologies' systematic theft of his work. Miranda had been forced to declare personal bankruptcy and faced ongoing legal proceedings from manufacturers who had been defrauded by her company's false patent claims. Her fall from corporate executive to professional pariah served as a cautionary tale about the consequences of prioritizing short-term profits over ethical business practices. "There's something else," Cassandra continued, her voice carrying the excitement of someone sharing good news. "The Society of Automotive Engineers wants to present you with their highest honor for technical innovation. The award ceremony will be broadcast internationally, and they've specifically mentioned your work in advancing diagnostic technology while maintaining the highest ethical standards." The award represented the ultimate professional vindication, recognition from his peers that Diego's contributions to automotive engineering ranked among the most significant achievements in the field's history. But what mattered more to Diego was the broader impact his story had created within the industry. The scandal had prompted automotive manufacturers worldwide to review their patent licensing practices and implement stronger oversight of intellectual property claims. Several companies had established ethics boards specifically to prevent the kind of systematic fraud that Whitmore Technologies had perpetrated. Diego's story had become a catalyst for industry-wide reforms that would protect future innovators from having their work stolen by unscrupulous corporate executives. Dr. Vasquez called Jake Morrison, Diego's newest research associate, approaching from the testing bay where advanced diagnostic systems were being calibrated. Jake had been one of the students from Pine Harbor who had earned a full scholarship to study automotive systems through the lab's educational outreach program. Proof that Diego's commitment to education was creating opportunities for the next generation. "The Pine Harbor team is reporting excellent progress with the mobile diagnostic unit," Jake continued, referring to the advanced service vehicle that Diego had developed to bring sophisticated automotive repair capabilities to rural communities. "They've successfully diagnosed and repaired 3 vehicles that would have required expensive towing to dealership service centers." The mobile diagnostic unit represented Diego's commitment to ensuring that his innovations benefited everyone, not just owners of luxury vehicles who could afford premium service. The technology that had been stolen and monetized for the wealthy was now being used to provide affordable, high-quality automotive repair to communities that had been underserved by traditional service networks. Zara looked up from her monitors with the expression of someone who had just received exciting news. "Dad, I just got accepted to MIT's accelerated program. I can start my doctorate in artificial intelligence while finishing my undergraduate degree. They want me to research applications of AI to automotive diagnostics." Diego felt his heart swell with pride as he realized that Zara would be continuing the family tradition of automotive innovation while advancing into new technological frontiers. The daughter who had grown up in a small-town garage was now positioned to become a leader in the next generation of automotive engineering. Cassandra walked to the window that overlooked the testing facility where Diego's diagnostic systems were being refined and prepared for implementation by manufacturers worldwide. 6 months ago I thought I was going to spend my afternoon signing licensing deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars based on stolen technology. Instead, I helped expose the biggest intellectual property fraud in automotive history." Diego joined Cassandra at the window, watching technicians calibrate diagnostic equipment that would soon be installed in vehicles around the world. "Do you regret the decision? You gave up enormous wealth to do the right thing." Cassandra smiled, her expression showing the kind of contentment that came from meaningful work rather than inherited privilege. "I learned something important that day in your garage. True success isn't about accumulating wealth or status. It's about creating value that makes other people's lives better." This work gives me purpose in a way that managing my family's empire never did." As evening approached, Diego found himself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought him from the depths of professional exile to the heights of industry recognition. The man who had been dismissed as a failed engineer was now directing one of the most respected automotive research facilities in the world, while the company that had stolen his work had become a cautionary tale about corporate fraud. But the most meaningful aspect of his transformation wasn't the professional success or financial security. It was the knowledge that his innovations were being used to solve real problems for millions of people, while his story had inspired industry-wide reforms that would protect future generations of engineers from similar exploitation. The diagnostic technologies that had been stolen and hidden behind corporate patents were now advancing automotive safety, efficiency, and reliability on a global scale. Diego's commitment to ethical innovation had created a legacy that would benefit the automotive industry for decades to come, proving that integrity and technical excellence were not just compatible, but mutually reinforcing. As Zara prepared for her journey to MIT and Cassandra planned expansion of their educational outreach programs, Diego looked forward to a future filled with the kind of meaningful work that had always been his true passion, solving complex technical challenges while mentoring the next generation of innovators who would carry automotive engineering into an even more remarkable future. The single father who had rebuilt his life from nothing had not only reclaimed his rightful place as one of the industry's most innovative minds, but had also created a model for how technical brilliance and ethical leadership could transform an entire industry. The quiet mechanic from Pine Harbor had become a beacon of hope for anyone who believed that truth and hard work could ultimately triumph over corporate power and systematic injustice. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.